thinking around this actually. This is Steve mentioned the postcode lottery green challenge that both of us are on the final jury for. And actually, when we were working on the club group for a while, started to get more involved in this challenge around basically targeted at disruptive startups, innovative startups. Started to realise through that process that actually there's some really cool stuff happening in the startup community. We've been quite focused on sort of big business up until then, kind of how do big businesses and governments move forward and lead, and became sort of increasingly aware of the sort of great ideas that were out there in startups and also some sort of brilliant people behind them. And I think that it's interesting to look at now how some of those startups are sort of working with financial community, with big business, and also that there's a sort of growing community of connectors trying to connect big businesses. Both Hannah and Steve mentioned their partnership with Daiku, which are two quite big businesses working with what was quite a recently found startup around, is it 1 or 2 years old? Was right when you first started working with them, I think?
A bit older than that.
Okay, small startup. And so what we wanted to focus on in this second panel is how does this ecosystem of finance, of disruptive innovators, big business and connectors work together, and what can we do to help scale up that process as a way of bringing innovative ideas and innovative startups to market. And so we've got a carefully curated group of 4 people here representing each one of those communities. So Andrew Shapiro, who's a founder of Broadscale, and previously of Green Order, but many of you have been aware of Andrew's work. So you're working with big businesses to help connect to innovative startups. So you're sort of at the nexus of trying to make these connections in a more effective way. Kingar Park, who's Managing Director of Environmental Markets at Goldman Sachs. Obviously looking at the financial side, Goldman Sachs becoming increasingly active in the worlds of clean tech and renewable energy. Eben is, contrary to rumour, not Ashton Kutcher, but is the CEO of Ecovative, and actually Eben, you were one of the first winners of the postcode lottery green challenge.
So we have another winner here today, I think.
And Ginger Dozie, who's over here, actually the most recent winner of the postcode lottery green challenge. So both of you actually quite similar businesses, of growing things that were previously industrially made in an organic way. So Eben's business, Ecovative, is growing styrofoam, basically from fungal material. There's a really interesting process, and there's sort of a huge moving forward in leaps and bounds. Ginger's a biomason growing bricks in the same way. So if you're interested, anyone in the building or the construction industry interested in growing their next building, you should speak to Ginger. And Harry Verhaar is from Philips, Clean Revolution partner of the Climate Group, and Harry has been instrumental in working with Philips in their transition to being a leading player in the LED lighting market and green products and services market. One of the fantastic facts that we quite often know is that 45% of Philips' revenue now from green products and services. So that's been some transformational change within Philips, and obviously working with a group of partners on policy, and Harry is probably the best networked person that we know in the world of lighting. So we'll kick off. Josh, would you like to kick off with the first question?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So in the earlier panel, there was quite a bit of talk about open innovation models, where from your seat as a big leading company, you can kind of open the doors and find hundreds, thousands, who knows how many ideas out there, and then bring them in and use your scale and leverage as a big company to push forward. We also heard, I think on the other side of the spectrum, there might be a duality here. We also heard big companies need to lead. They need to say, here is what we are doing, and then just go make it happen. So as we think about partnerships across that potential duality, from open, let's all find ways to work together and collaborate, to we need to lead, who's coming with us, and we're going to plug you in various places. I'm wondering, across the panel, how you guys think about the nature of partnership to drive sustainability innovation.
Well, as one of the smaller innovative technology companies trying to take advantage of the scale that big corporations bring, I think that's the right model. I'll say it actually can be very frustrating for all the reasons that make big companies great: the ability to quickly go to scale, the ability to quickly deploy along a known business path. When you have an innovative technology, an innovative material, an innovative service, typically it doesn't mesh too well. And we've seen it go both ways at Ecovative. We've done partnerships in the material science space that frankly with companies that are innovative that have been total disasters. When you get behind the other side of the door, you realize there's no capacity for innovation. And we've done partnerships in industries that you would never think of being innovative, like protective packaging, where we've seen partners that don't talk about being innovative, but we're able to embrace and scale a tremendously innovative technology very quickly, which is what we've been doing with Sealed Air. So I've seen it both ways, and I think was raised on the panel before are the kind of spot-on spaces of combining what little nimble companies do well, which is move quickly, be innovative, get it done next week, and what big companies can do, which is actually reach a lot of customers, create change.
I think for us, we're obviously a very large financial institution, and one of our core products is obviously moving capital where it's needed. And so when we think about innovation in low-carbon solutions, and let me step back a little bit and make an obvious point, but one that I think is quite important. You can't hear. You can't hear? I'll try to project a little bit more. Okay. Thank you. Now, I was going to make an obvious, but I think a rather important point when we think about low-carbon solutions, particularly around capital-intensive sectors like energy, that for the most part, it's still relatively disadvantaged from a risk-reward equation, right? And markets are highly efficient, and therefore capital flows into where there is more optimal risk-reward. So the reality is, for us, the biggest challenge is how do we actually seek out, companies that are innovating and trying to scale up low-carbon solutions where we could also make sure that there is an optimized risk-reward equation. And we do it in a couple of different ways, and then we talk about, one or two examples, and we can elaborate if it's of interest. One of it is for our core business. We have a number of commitments across our business platform, and let me talk about one of them. We have a dedicated clean tech and renewable banking team, which I think is relatively unique in the sense that it's really a number of senior bankers that are solely focused on really working with our clean tech clients and understanding their capital needs from when they're an early stage company all the way through their growth cycles, and eventually when they are actually ready for accessing the public capital markets. And so we have the ability to actually co-invest, leveraging our balance sheet, which I think is, again, quite unique for an investment banking team. We can help companies go through private placement cycles as they go through the various series of financings that they need in the private market, and eventually work with them in going public and then being able to access the broader public capital markets. We can also help them monetize tax equity, and we recently announced a couple of transactions in partnership with a couple of DG solar companies, where we can help monetize tax equity. And for those of you who are familiar with the clean energy space, one of the big policy drivers is around tax credits. It's a 30% investment tax credit, or production tax credit that is available. But many of the clean energy companies, given they're young, don't have a large tax capacity to use it themselves, and so they have to look for third-party investors who can monetize it. And we can help companies do that as well. So it's a relatively unique way of thinking about the various angles of capital. And on the heels of that, we've been able to deploy, over 30 billion in capital for clean energy alone over the last 7 years. And last year, when the markets were rather challenged, we thought about what can we do more to show that we believe in the market despite the volatility of the market. And as a firm, we decided to make a commitment to say we're going to catalyze another 40 billion over the coming decade because the thesis around clean energy is that much more compelling. And that's obviously a commercial-driven commitment, not a philanthropic commitment. The other way that we try to leverage our market know-how, coming back to the partnership point, and trying to really scale up these solutions, is leveraging our market know-how in concert with our clients, with our NGO partners as well as think tanks, and thinking about how we can de-bottleneck some of the challenges that exist to scaling up the capital solutions. And it can come in the form of market-based tools. It can come in the form of facilitating independent research that can really help inform public policy options. So again, just as a brief example, we're a member of what's called the American Council on Renewable Energy. And there are a number of partners, including ACOR, that's working on extending what's called master limited partnerships towards clean energy. MLPs are available for conventional forms of energy, oil and gas pipelines in particular, and it's a particularly efficient way of moving capital given that you only have one-time taxation. It's a public trading vehicle, so access to public markets and liquidity. as well as it broadens the investor base even into retail, which is often quite difficult to actually get into clean forms of energy as well. And if you can extend it, it's another way of moving capital more efficiently. And so we've been involved in thinking about what does it mean for the market and trying to help inform some of the public policy options around this. So those are a couple of examples of partnerships around how we can actually further capital to low carbon solutions.
Yes, I think just a few things. When I think about sustainability and partnerships, the first thing that comes to mind is it's about mindset. So like Hannah mentioned, and sustainability, I feel, is a word that has pros and cons. So the pros that it has a lot of convening power, but the negative of having this word is that people think it's something different, whereas it's just another word for innovation. I think another thing on mindset is what Steve said, in other words, we need to move from thinking more is better to better is best. And if you start thinking about, hey, better is best, that's a real challenge, and then indeed you decouple resource consumption from actually what it's all about, the service that you want to deliver. Until we had open office space, also maybe a remark on a large company, because that has benefits as well, but also there's more inertia in a large company, because there's more checks and balances and all that. I had, until we had open office space 2 years ago, I always had the 10 commandments of the entrepreneur, so the entrepreneur within the company on the wall. And everybody knew that I lived those every day. The first one was there. It said, well, go to work every day, realizing it can be your last. And the second one is do everything, or neglect everything that is intended to destroy your dream. And there was another one I think some of you recognize, I think it was number 8. And that's also a good one in a large company. It said it's easier to ask for forgiveness afterwards than for permission on beforehand. And I find also there, if you start asking for permission, thinking about permission management, in a large company you will always find people who don't understand, or really not looked at the subject, and say, nah, maybe not. So, but then if you follow this rule, and then thinking about forgiveness instead of permission, suddenly you get an enormous amount of freedom. And people actually, they appreciate it, because everybody still in a large company wants to be an entrepreneur, and the company itself even more so. I think secondly, it's also about, what do you want to achieve? I think we spoke about lighting, and like Steve, we also work on energy efficient lighting, LEDs and all that. I said a few things about it yesterday. But you don't buy a light bulb for its energy efficiency, and you don't buy it for its carbon reduction. You buy it for the service, the lighting service that you get. And there actually 10 years ago, now maybe until 5 to 10 years ago, the consumer lighting market was almost destroyed completely by cost focus. So you will remember, so things are changing now a bit, but you went to buy a light bulb in the supermarket or in a retail outlet. And the only focus that was there was on reducing cost. So you get the silly incandescent light bulb, ever cheaper, private labels, thinner packaging, uglier printing, whatever. So it completely destroyed profits at our side, profits at their side. And actually in the end you saw, hey, you don't actually have the lighting service that you want to have in your home. So what's happening now with LEDs, this is completely opening up. So in innovation, also there, we launched, talking about partnerships, last year a bit of a leapfrog that will also be copied at, let's say, at different price points and performances. But then the leapfrog was that we launched the world's first smart LED bulb together with Apple. And initially, I don't know if any of you bought it, it's called Hue. That was launched for $199, so I think that's more than Steve wanted, but also, okay, there was a leapfrog launch that started at the top there. But then including plug into your router and app on your iPhone, and it was crazy, it was selling like hot dogs. We were extremely surprised by the speed that it took. It won within, in the same year, it was launched last year, September, Forbes recognition of the best innovation of the year, and suddenly people, they were playing on their iPhone and setting the lighting in the home, creating any kind of atmosphere that you want. So there are some pre-settings, but also if you have a picture of a romantic day and you hold it in front of your iPhone, and the lighting changes. If you're on holidays, you can just set and change the lighting. Suddenly you see, hey, you're starting to think about lighting as home decoration, about the service that really matters. And then thirdly, I think, and also their partnerships are important, it's about, what actually do you want to innovate? I think for part you can innovate technology, making it more efficient, dematerializing and all that, but also we need to think about how can you make it more intelligent, like the example with you, so that you get more value, more service for money. But innovation also means, how do you innovate policies that actually help making, accelerating innovation or sustainable development, to use that word, in the marketplace, and we all know why. It also means innovating financing. So we are working with cities, with banks, with multilaterals on providing financing mechanisms. And not because, let's say what people say, it's more expensive, we can't afford it, but because the balance between, let's say, capital and operational expenditure is forever changed. So here we need to go to a paradigm shift in financing. It's not just looking where's some funding, where's some money to pay for the LED lighting or for the whatever solution. We need to think about, we need to rethink financing, and you can only do that in partnership. And I think fourthly also there, how do you innovate communication? Even here, you say, we're in the low carbon innovators forum. I don't know if you want to tell back home that you were in the low carbon innovators forum, because it doesn't really sound inspiring. Low carbon is just a feature. I think we should focus also in the narrative much more on the benefit. And we see there, even with LED lighting, I said a few things about it yesterday. You talk about, do people feel safe in the city? Do you feel relaxed and comfortable at home? How productive is your work environment? Things like that. So we need to, in our narrative, we need to include those words that are tangible for people so that they know what they choose for. Because when they do that in larger numbers, then companies like ours will be able to accelerate, and actually the legacy will follow. Politicians will see, this is what people want and what they vote for. And what people vote for is what politicians will try to sell us. So I think there are many areas to innovate, and just the example of you is one, but also intelligent street lighting. So increasingly we're working with cities in public-private partnerships, where instead, like in the past, you can imagine, certainly in Holland, at night the maintenance manager goes around on his bicycle and see, which lights still work. But then with intelligent street lighting, every light point over the existing mains has an IP address. So the city mayor or somebody in his team, they can just see it on the monitor. And they can dim when there's a surge in electricity demand somewhere else. But also automatically, because it's all automated, there's the whole guarantee in there, because it monitors how much, how long, etc. So there you see, you're really innovating, and that means that you're also talking about partnerships. And last thing, you need to see, with whom do you speak? So maybe not initially with the purchasing manager or the maintenance manager, but indeed with the city mayor, or with the people who actually have interest in providing the service for their citizens, for their employees, or for their constituency. So I think those areas are really relevant.
Let's bring Andrew in actually, because I think that we're interested in hearing a little bit more about what you do and as a connector in the space, but also if you could perhaps reflect, I think a lot of your experience has been working with the energy sector, and actually a lot of the companies that have been represented in the room today have been not in that sector, they've been more in sort of fast-moving consumer goods and retail, which I think is maybe interesting to reflect on. Is it easier to be an innovator in that space than it is in energy? Could you sort of maybe explain a little bit more about what you do and reflect on that question around energy versus other sectors?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I'm going to skip the mic. So Broadscale Group is a new model of investment firm that is committed to accelerating innovation for sustainability in the energy sector and in other resource areas. And actually, we take the view that this is a sector, maybe unlike consumer goods, furniture, and others, where no progress will be made unless we have a pairing of capacities that you can only find in these two communities we're talking about. So let me unpack that a little bit. We think the key to progress in this area is taking the entrepreneurial drive and creativity that we've been talking about, that is represented by Eben's company, and pairing that with the balance sheet, scale, go-to-market, regulatory knowledge, customer relationships that you can only find in large companies. And the reason that's true is if you think about the places where, as we were talking about yesterday at the kickoff, really the rubber hits the road on these issues. It's energy, it's buildings like the one we're in, it's agriculture, it's all of these areas that are incredibly resource intensive. And those are spaces, I mean, if you go back to Chris's model of entrepreneurship, Hewlett-Packard, right? Our whole vision of Silicon Valley is two guys in a garage, or Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room at Harvard, or Larry and Sergey. That doesn't really happen in power generation, in infrastructure, in agriculture, in transportation, in material science, although maybe you guys are breaking the mold. But I think at the end of the day, what we'll see is that the breakthrough products and innovators in this space are the ones who are able to partner with large companies to take their ideas to scale, which I understand your company is doing, Sealed Air and others, right? I want to learn more about that. So our thesis is we need a tighter knit ecosystem, just like I was saying about capital. When I talk about a new model of investment firm, part of it is money, but capital is necessary for these businesses, and everybody's talked about the commercialization valley of death and getting companies over that, but it's not sufficient for success. So we can look at scores of examples of clean energy and clean technology companies that had hundreds of millions of dollars invested in them and still went down the drain because they didn't have the right market knowledge, channels, know-how, technology partnerships, etc. So that's what we're working on at Broadscale. How do you create that ecosystem? We're starting with a network in the power sector that includes 4 large companies: Duke, the largest utility in the US, National Grid, the largest utility in the UK, which also has US assets, General Electric, which folks know, and Johnson Controls, which is the largest player in building efficiency and automotive batteries. And we chose those companies because they're all market leaders, and we thought there's a way that we can try to take some of these new innovations and technologies and business models and bring them to scale. Now, it's not a new idea. If you look at the companies that are succeeding in this space, some of them are represented in this room. Some Kyung-Ah already mentioned, just in terms of like the partnership that Goldman Sachs has had with Solar City and others in the solar space. But one example I use all the time, which we all know and are talking about, is Tesla, right? When people think about Tesla's success, they think the unbelievable innovation and design. They think about Elon Musk's singular determination as an entrepreneur, fanatically. But a critical component of that success was actually the 3 strategic partnerships that Tesla forged in about the 2 or 3 years before it went public, with Daimler, with Panasonic, and with Toyota. Now, those companies invested in Tesla, but much more importantly, they forged strategic partnerships around supply chain, around technology refinement, around product development, around go-to-market, and all of them are benefiting as a result. So it's a real win-win. So going back to the beginning, and actually we had this terrific panel to start, how do corporates win? And I think Steve is right. Big companies are not generally good at innovating. They need to look outside, embrace open innovation, and particularly the ones in the energy and resources and sort of hard sectors need to do that because utilities are not very good at innovating. And the startups in that space are never going to get really to scale unless they partner. So they both need each other. It's actually a perfect symmetry. And that's why I think it's an area that's exciting to work in.
So great points. And there's one question for Andrew and then for the group as well. What are the capabilities that will enable good partnerships? So we've talked a lot about culture. Are there specific aspects of culture that need to change if you're a startup, if you're the big company, if you're the government body? We've talked a little bit about business models, how you make money going to change when you are in a partnership economy. Any lessons or insights or questions from the group on that?
I think matching culture is a good point, but I think one is how do you get the big company to move in the first place? And people talk about is it top down, is it bottom up? And we found success, and it's sort of like every way in, right? So you kind of have to have every box being checked in the big company to create enough noise in the signal that you get a peak, and then you can make partnership happen. And then the other side is, and you hear this a lot, but you do have to structure agreements that are win-win. So you said it, I said it, but if a small company has innovative technology, you talked about information, right? So you want to be thought of as an information company, right? People in dorm rooms or in garages scale information companies because it's easy to scale information, right? You can get servers, you can move bits around, you can connect people. It's still hard, right? But it's easier. Moving massive amounts of material around, you talked about the amount of material you move around, is really, really hard. And typically these big companies do it for significantly less margin than some of the information companies. So it's both a harder problem and you get paid less for society. And so when you design these partnerships as an innovative company, you have to find a way to make that a win-win. And that can be around profit sharing if you're disruptive, around being able to radically lower our cost profile and get rewarded for doing that, but finding that thing that you can bring to the table that allows you to exchange for the scale. How do you exchange innovation for scale and do so in a way that doesn't end up screwing up the reasons that make it scalable?
I think also it starts off with the innovation model. So as Philips, we had until maybe 10 years ago, so at the south of Eindhoven, we have our whole innovation campus. And I think until a number of years ago, that was really a closed-off community. And then we changed to a model of open innovation. It's actually opening up the whole site for more companies. I think there are now 80, including a lot of upstarts. And that has been elected 2 years ago as the smartest square kilometer on the planet. So let's say our own Silicon Valley. And it spurs innovation. And also, let's say, being a large company, we also have venture teams who have a protected budget. But I think also innovation starts off with a mindset. So at least what I see as a large part of my job is bringing the outside voice in, because a lot of people in a large company, they don't see the outside world. So you have to bring it to them and to show how that actually that's the purpose why we innovate, and not, let's say, some internal performance indicator that might be the result. So I think that, the whole ecosystem around innovation, so that you really stimulate that. And then, the mindset. So always find ways, large or small, to bring the outside world in, to focus on the relevant trends and challenges that you'd like to solve. And then you also discover, and I think that's also something that you collectively feel, you're not alone. What I see quite often is that 8 out of 10 people in whatever function, deep down, they behave like product managers. When they speak to a city mayor or somebody else, they want to explain how stuff works. And then I'm trying to tell them, no, you should first reflect on what are the challenges. Okay, maybe where do we have some solutions? But then again, how can we collectively pick up the larger part of those challenges that has not yet been resolved? And then you find, whether it's Ban Ki-moon or a city mayor or somebody in a small municipality, they all have the same concerns. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. And I think that's when you engage for further innovation. And then you see, okay, it's about, let's say, the footprint, the efficiency, how that translates in monetary impacts, but most of all, how does it relate to the service that actually people are trying to provide. So I think those kind of things I find really important in driving and accelerating innovation.
It was interesting, Clay Christensen, the founder of Josh's company, gave a talk a couple of weeks ago at the Royal Society in London, where he was talking about different sorts of innovation. And the job-creating sort of innovation was the one which makes things which are inaccessible and expensive, accessible and cheap. And that's the kind of innovation that creates jobs. And I think actually most people in the clean tech space are trying to do that. They're trying to make electric vehicles available for everybody. They're trying to make LED lighting available for everybody. It's a new service, and so you're creating new economic activity. And we've seen actually in the last few years, I think, capital not really flowing into this space. Quite a risk aversion from investors in the VC space, investing in clean tech companies. I was talking to one investor a couple of weeks ago, so like trying to sell $10 bills for $1, you can't sell it. I think there's a frustration in that space. So what needs to happen going forwards to get capital flowing back into this space again?
So we actually, last week I was in Menlo, and we held our annual Clean Energy Ecosystem Summit, and I also was at an Ecovative Summit. And I think one of the key themes that seemed to be a pervasive theme seemed to be the view of capital light, right, in the venture capital community. Now, I think for some time there were those that believed that they can invest in clean energy, but they didn't realize how capital intensive it is, and to the earlier point, also how entrenched the incumbents are, the utilities are, right? And so I think they're pivoting a bit in terms of trying to figure out how can they invest in low carbon solutions and cleaner forms of energy or cleaner forms of solutions that can be more capital light. And I think there's also a convergence that's happening, talking about partnerships, between what I call energy technology and information technology, so harnessing data to make sure that you're engaging consumers and empowering them to make better choices. Whether it's figuring out when they want to actually turn on their washing machine, ideally not during the peak of the day, but hopefully later in the night where they can also have energy savings. Thinking about how they can change from being on the grid through a centralized power system that often can be based on fossil-based energy, to putting solar panels on your roof and getting somewhat disconnected from that centralized generation, and having the co-benefit again of not only cleaner forms of energy, but also being able to generate energy that can sell back into the grid and have significant savings. And so there are these, I think, models that are evolving that certainly venture capitalists are putting their money to work in, which I think is a very encouraging space, and capital will flow. So you're seeing a lot of capital flow into DG Solar. It's interesting, over the course of the last 2 months, I've gotten a couple of inbound requests to look at the US DG Solar market and see how strategics that are overseas can actually make bets here. So it's a sign of the capital that wants to flow for the right opportunity sets. Now, coming back to your question around how do we then get capital to flow in more capital-intensive areas around energy or low-carbon solutions, it's incredibly hard. And I think many of you have heard this before, but you really have to have a trifecta of policy, working in concert with technology and capital to be able to do that. And so policy plays a very big role in all of this. And it can come in the form of mandates. We've seen how successful renewable portfolio standards have been across some 30 states in driving renewable electricity generation and having utilities become off-takers for that renewable energy. We've also seen mandates in the form of banning certain technology. There's a phase-out that's going to happen for incandescent light bulbs, which should, in theory, be able to drive up demand for alternative technology. And you also have things like technology standards, like fuel efficiency standards at the federal level, the low carbon fuel standards in California, that are actually having a significant impact on driving innovation, both across the conventional combustion engine and the conventional car, such as lighter materials, but also in alternative technologies, certainly EV and Tesla. I think I saw an article recently that hydrogen fuel cells are actually going to come into fruition within the next 5 years as well. So there is innovation happening. I think policy has to play a significant role in terms of providing visibility for that demand. And earlier I talked about the risk-reward equation, but shifting that risk-reward equation to make low-carbon solutions that are particularly capital-intensive and have large incumbents worthwhile.
I would just add to that and amplify that even those new capital light businesses or clean web businesses or whatever we want to call them, they too need the benefit of big partners in these markets. So let me give you a couple of examples. O-Power is a software company that is really leading in home energy management. They go to market through utilities. They have 70 or 80 utility customers and really are using the interface of the utility to get to the end customer. Recycle Bank, where I'm on the advisory board and a shareholder, Steve Wesley's here as well as on the board, they're working very closely with waste management. Realize that the best way for Recycle Bank, which is a loyalty and incentive program, not a hard asset business, to get to market was through waste management. Silver Spring Networks, a leading smart grid company, big partnerships with Hitachi and EMC. Basically, it's hard to name a successful company in these markets that hasn't figured out how to leverage those partnerships. Zipcar, business model innovation, doesn't need any help, got bought by Avis because it couldn't really compete in the market with Hertz and others and big guys. So I think this is going to be the pattern. The question is, how do we create these mutually beneficial partnerships so that there's a win-win? To Evan's point, that's the only thing. Architecting that is a cultural thing. It's incredibly difficult to keep it going. You need top-down and bottom-up support. You need to find that mutual benefit so both sides win. And the key, I think, for the entrepreneurs in the room is, to be honest, the big corporates don't really care about their return on investment in your company. Because no matter what they invested, $5, $10, $50, or $100 million, it's not going to make a difference to their balance sheet. What they care about is, how do you help them become more innovative? And that's really the secret.
That's why PCs make bad clean tech partners and corporations make good clean tech partners. Because the capital intensity of the business, if you look at that philosophy, a 10-to-1 return on capital invested in a business that moves material goods around, whether you call it electrons, silicon, or wood, is not going to do what an information company would do. So if you can find that extra connection for value for a corporate partner, the return on capital demands are so different in terms of your value proposition that you can have a win-win partnership.
And we can actually look at, again, looking at the history of IT, where I was before I got into clean tech and green. I mean, look at companies like Cisco. Cisco grew into a powerhouse because they acquired lots of smaller businesses, and they acquired them for much more than book value. There was strategic value in that. Intel, same thing. Google has been a major acquirer of companies. Facebook, Instagram, etc. So there's models to learn from, but I think it's particularly acute around these hard resources of energy and infrastructure that we figure out how to do this and accelerate it. Because the truth is, if we don't do that, these innovative solutions we're all talking about remain tiny pieces of the market share. And that's, you know, we lose the environmental benefit as well.
Great. I think we have time for just one or two questions from the group. Yes.
I'm Bill Mumma. I'm the president of the Climate Group Board North America. And my day job is as a professor of international environmental resource policy at Tufts University. I'm working on these issues since 1988. It's a long time. This summer, the Edison Electric Institute put out a report saying that even though rooftop solar panels were only a quarter of all electricity generated, it was a threat to their business model. My response was, amen. The fact that I can get an 80% reduction by changing my light bulbs is a threat to their business model. And what is really exciting to me from both of these panels is they're starting at the service end and moving up, whereas the utilities and the coal companies, who've seen their share of power generation drop so dramatically, are starting at the top end and trying to push more coal into the system. So I think it's exceedingly important to keep pushing from what is the service we're providing people. And I've heard that from just about every one of the 8 panelists. And how is that service going to be provided the most sustainable way? How does that connect to this push from the gross suppliers and from the government structures which support the gross suppliers, making it difficult for them to change? How can we make that connection?
Yeah, so maybe I'm not in the utility space, but I think also for utilities they need to think, and some do. I think one of the forerunners, at least as I know, is Duke Energy. Yes. But in Holland also Eneco. They need to think about what do they provide? Do they sell energy, or do they provide energy services? And then you see that some of them they're recognizing they can't survive by just selling ever more energy. But they need indeed to provide also services, let's say on solar, energy efficiency, lighting, financing, perhaps even installation, maintenance, and I think those will be the winners. But I would hope that this would go a little bit faster than what's going today, instead of the pushback, even, so that in general, for energy companies.
You know, it's an interesting point that you raised, because it's fascinating to be sitting in the seat that I'm in, where you see where the capitals are moving. And on coal, I would say, here in the US at least, we really haven't seen any financing opportunities for new coal power plant generation in a while. I think the last one we did actually was in 2007. And part of that's driven by regulation, part of that's driven by, the actual nat gas and shale boom, and part of it's driven by the fact that, between the financial crisis and some of the demand response and energy efficiency measures, demand is actually being curtailed. Just coming back to the EI point, it's also incredibly interesting to see the disruption that's happening in the incumbent utility model. And we talked about partnerships to drive innovation, but I think a lot of companies are also partnering with young early stage companies that have really revolutionary technology, because they're playing defense to avoid the disruption that's going to be happening. And I think many people use analogy with the telecom industry as to what happened, going from the very large telcos being broken up, and effectively not many people now have fixed line phones in their home. I think I'm one of the few, at least among my younger generation of colleagues. And so people have gone to mobile platforms, and the mobile platforms effectively not only do you call people or text people, but it's controlling your energy systems. It's controlling, we just renovated and I put in the Sonos system, which is the coolest thing for me, where you can actually from your phone control all your music devices. And so it's become a source for basically driving behavior and basically driving service in many ways, an ancillary service. And I think the utility model eventually, I don't know how quickly it's going to transform, but we'll go from pushing electrons that are commoditized and compete on cost to basically driving different services and effectively trying to obtain customer stickiness through those service models.
Can I just add one thing to that? Sure. I mean, this is exactly kind of the most interesting thing happening in the energy market today. And as Kyung-Ha said, the real question is who can pivot fast enough. Mm-hmm. The incumbent regulated utilities are going to have a hard time doing it, but some of them are investing in this area. Southern Cal Edison just bought a solar company in Chicago. NextEra bought one here in New York. Duke Energy and 3 other utilities invested in clean power finance. A number of them are working with Solar City, Direct Energy, leading retail electric. So they're starting to realize that this death spiral that was talked about in that EEI report could be real, and they're trying to figure out exactly what Kyung-Hoi said. I mean, Verizon, the most amazing statistic to me, Verizon lost 1/3 of all of their landlines in the last 5 years, okay? But they have increased their revenue because of all of these additional services they're providing and because people are signing up for phone lines or connectivity on tablets, etc. That's the challenge. Very few of the big utilities will be able to do it. Smaller players like NRG, which are not regulated, are diversifying into 3 and 4 different businesses around these new energy sources, and that's going to be interesting to watch.
That's great. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. I'd love to carry on the conversation for another hour or so with a group of people that we've got together. Thank you very much for your insights. I think this is something where it's an exciting conversation. It's nice after a lot of conversations around the challenge of climate change, the need to peak global emissions by 2020. Progress isn't fast enough. It's actually great to have a conversation about creating better products and services that happen to be lower carbon. I think actually having that outlook in terms of what we're doing going forward is increasingly important. I like the concept of innovating around innovation. I think there's more collaboration required, more connection, more understanding of how people are doing this well and how this can be, how you sort of get the early adopters in innovation to spread further out. I think our role at the Climate Group is to turn best practice into a widely adopted practice and to help that process. So we'll be working within a site and with Marblar and with our members and partners going forwards to try to help them move forwards on innovation, understand some key principles, make better connections between our network as well. So it's an area that we're sort of increasingly excited about working in. Look forward to working with those of you in the room that are our partners. If others of you are interested in the field of low carbon innovation and how we can work together, please see me or one of our colleagues. But in the meantime, I'd like to have a round of applause for our Some of you are staying with us for our members' meeting.